Hi, this is Gordon Hisayasu, and I'm doing Chapter 4, The Photons, and this is Part 2. I mentioned that during the Big Bang, that energy had to be just right for humans to be created billions of years later and for everything to exist. In some ways, the way that God made the photon is amazing so that we can see some 13 billion years later. So the photon was basically following this Big Bang theory that they have in the ninth step of their timeline. That's 9 out of 15 steps. And this occurred within 3 minutes to 240,000 years, which seems like a long stretch of time, but it really isn't because the universe is 13.7 billion years old, billion years. And so in this time, the universe was still very small and compact. And even though these photons were there, they couldn't get out of this dense, hot plasma that existed at that time. And this didn't occur until about 300,000 years during the next epoch, where all of a sudden it got expanded and cool enough so that these photons could partially escape. I think this is where we had the cosmic microwave background radiation, which the scientists used to prove the Big Bang Theory itself. But still, we weren't able to really see light occur until the stars formed. And that was between 300,000 or 300 and 500 million years. That's still millions. We're not talking about billions yet. But that's when the stars started to form. And that's when photons were actually created and basically could illuminate the sky or the universe at that time. And we were able to see, and the heavens proclaimed the glory of God. And this is where I could see and where I could find my God in that display that of light that all of a sudden burst into existence. This is just a part of what happened, though I have to get into a few other aspects of it. We know that what we see is not the illuminated light itself. We can't look directly at the sun. We see what is called reflected light. The moon is entirely reflected light. The stars illuminate out and we can see them, but everything practically on Earth is what we call reflected light. And so when that photon of energy reaches the Earth, we see it as different colors and things. But that photon is developed inside the core of the sun, and by nuclear fusion. And it is so hot and dense at that core that it can take up to 1 million years for that photon to be able to work its way out to the surface of the sun. By the time when it reaches that surface, it just irradiates out, but it irradiates out in all directions. But some of that hits the Earth, which is 93 million miles away. But it's coming at us pretty fast. It's coming at us at 186,000 miles per second. If you want to imagine that, it would be, Superman makes it around the Earth pretty fast, but a light photon would make it around Earth about 10 times or maybe 8 times in a second. And so we're basically looking at some really big numbers of photons that are illuminated from the sun because only a small fraction hits us. But that small fraction of that hits us gives us all the energy of our Earth, and it also gives us sight. Okay, and you can take sight as being fairly simple, but it isn't. And if you think that God is simple and non-complex, then you're not thinking of the same God I am. I remember going to class and trying to understand how photons are converted to something that we can see, a visual wavelength that we can see. And I remember talking about how electrons are circling these atoms or the core of the atoms, the protons and the neutrons. And when they are hit by light, they absorb the light, and that puts the electron in an excited state, but that's unstable. So when it drops back into its stable state, its stable orbit, it emits a photon of light, and therefore, grass is going to be green and tomatoes are going to be red and my hair used to be black. You know, and that's where we get our color, but it's not a very simplistic process. But even more complex is when we have to visualize the eye, you know, and I remember thinking how awesome it is that during these mass extinctions that God had to recreate and recreate different diverse species all the time. With the eye, he has made many, many types of eyes for just many, many types of animals, but they're all kind of different in a way. You know, some of them have these little photosensitive spots and things like that, but things like the eye of a hawk, which sees much better than we do, and the eye of an owl that can see better in the dark, and insects that seem to be able to look in all different directions at the same time. So they all have eyes, you know, and man might not have the best eye, but what we do have, you know, and if you think that our little thumb is unique, you know, the little opposing thumb, with that we can pick up a dime. You know, don't ask a monkey ever to stack pennies because he doesn't have that. But we're unique in a much greater way in the sense of our brain and how we look at light. You know, it still goes through the lenses, the retina, and the cones, and it's sent to our brains as electrical impulses. I don't know if you ever saw that where you got a reverse upside down image and our brain has to flip flop it, you know, just through its own process. But that is just a little piece of what the brain does with this kind of information it's receiving from the reflected photon lights. You know, when we get a pie, we're able to see that pie, but we're able to cut it into 10 pieces and feed 10 of our guests. You know, or we can look at an equation like E equals mc squared, and we can use our mind to convert that equation into things like hydrogen bombs. So it is amazing and unique what we can do with sight. You know, we basically don't see just an object. We see, evaluate, we even speculate, and we create actions that are very, very complex from our vision, from what we see. And this is the sight that God gave us. And when God said, let there be light, he didn't say, let there be gravity, or let there be mass, or let there be time. He said, let there be light, because this light gives us the sight. And it's pretty hard to imagine that the idea of sight and vision is something that occurs randomly. And this is why we must really recognize the significance of God in everything we see. Thank you.